Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yuzrael, and welcome back to the wonderful world of Mechwarrior Online. We're going to be taking a look at one of the newer mechs in the game today, the Cicada. It is a 40-ton mech that is technically classed as a medium, but in many respects has more in common with the likes of the Jenna as a scout mech than it does with the Hunchback as a medium. This is a 3M, possibly the most unusual variant. In fact, we'll take a look at all of them very quickly. Ignore the Yenlo Wang, that is something completely different. Base variant was the 2A. 6 energy hardpoints, of which 3 are used, 130 kph top speed, armor 128. As I said, the manufacturers claim this thing is a medium mech, but to be perfectly frank, it behaves like a scout mech in all important respects except one: it hasn't got jump jets, which I'll admit straight up I consider to be a major failing in any mech under 50 tons. And to be perfectly frank, if you could find me a way to squeeze jump jets onto a 90-ton mech, well, let's just say I'm going to be learning the bagpipes over the next few weeks. The 2B is a slight change. It loses one of the hardpoints and replaces the small laser with a flamer. Well, I suppose that's the difference between replacing a pop gun with another pop gun. In canon, of course, that would be far more useful against infantry, but we don't have infantry in Mechwarrior Online, so it's a little dubious. The 3C is a very definite departure from the standards, dumps most of the hardpoints, fits 4 ballistic hardpoints and a single PPC. Essentially, this is an energy-centered sniper version of the mech. 113.4 kph means that it should have, I note, the speed to run away from anything it can't kill with the PPC. And of course we have the 3M, which could be regarded as the most balanced version of the mech. Ultra AC5 by default, pair of medium lasers and a small pulse. I've actually customised this a touch, replacing the small pulse with a third medium laser, and the Ultra AC5 has gone being replaced with the standard AC5. I cannot stand the Ultra version's annoying tendency to jam. It also mounts an XL320 engine, giving it the same speed as the standard Cicadas, 129.6 kph. The downside, of course, is that I don't have much tonnage to trade for anything else. I will have to convert to things like endo steel and ferrofibrous armour to free up tonnage. That's always a problem with light to medium mechs anyway, and to be perfectly frank, given this thing's sheer similarity to the Jenna, there's a good argument for saying it ought to be classed as a light mech, tonnage bans be blown. So, let's load it up and get it into a game, see how it does. Right, River City, not my favourite map in a light mech. This thing really favours close quarters work and thus assault and heavy mechs, particularly anything mounting multiple AC-20s. But let's see what we can do. Cockpit layout is pretty standard. Visibility is decent horizontally, little restricted vertically. You have a hard time seeing what's above you, but that's rarely a problem in Mechwarrior. Right up to the moment that they introduce aerospace fighters, but the maps are so small that I don't think that's ever going to be a problem beyond strikes that we as Mechwarriors can call in. Weapon grouping, I've set this up. Now, interestingly, the standard config does actually come with preset groups. So the Ultra AC is on weapon 2, the medium lasers are on weapon 1, and the small pulse was actually on weapon 3. This was by default, which is a very nice touch from the developers. Usually you have to pull all your weapons off weapon config 1 and set them up in your first map. Fortunately, they didn't make you do that this time. Okay, just call that in, and then get the hell off thermal, because I want to be able to see what I'm actually doing. Blast it! Oh yes, the other big weakness of the Cicada at present... Hello, mate. Cancel the zoom. is that it lacks armour. Come on, come on, come on. It's also having a severe heat problem with that third medium laser, so I may actually want to power down for a second. Nope, there we go, we're on the cooldown. As you can see, this guy has taken a severe pounding and, in fact, he's fallen over. Bear in mind that, again, this thing is being advertised as a medium. It's only got 128 points of armour, about 4 tons. By default, compare that to the Hunchy, which mounts 10 in its role as a brawler. Of course, the Hunchy is only half the speed. I repeat, this thing is basically an oversized Jenner. And unfortunately, the Jenner has got one big advantage: jump jets. Which this thing cannot mount at all. So if I was in a Jenner, I could have just jetted up there and saved myself a ton of trouble. As it is, I'm going to have to loop around through the underpass and come back here. But I think that guy is a lag out, so shouldn't be an issue. What is an issue is that if you compare the Cicada with the Jenner, it has a nasty tendency to be found wanting. Let's run this down for a second. In terms of firepower, both are pretty much the same overall. This version of the Cicada has a damage rating of 20. I've got custom Jenners that normally hover at about 22 to 25, depending on what you load them with. The Cicada's big advantage is that it has ballistic hardpoints available to it. None of the Jenners mount it. Of course, the problem with that is that by the time you've crammed in a big enough ballistic gun to make a serious difference, you're scrabbling around for tonnage to mount enough ammunition that you aren't out of the battle after a dozen shots. In addition, the Jenner, or at least the Jenner Ds and Ks, can mount missile launchers, which goes some way towards making up the difference. Your kneecaps, they are ours. Defensively, on paper they're fairly similar. The Cicada has 128 points of armour per stock, as does the Jenner. However, there is a serious problem with the Cicada, and that's its size. I mean, look at this Jenner. Now, if I stomp right over to him, you can see that the Cicada is a good 10 feet taller, maybe even more, than the Jenner. And the end result of that is that it's a much bigger target and it's much easier to hit. So that thin armour is suddenly a real disadvantage. Mobility, of course, speed-wise they're about the same, mostly because the Cicada can mount a slightly more powerful engine. However, you can crowbar an XL300 into a Jenner and get it up to 140 kph. Not sure how far you can tweak a Cicada's engine, but yeah, the killer in this respect is always going to be that the Jenner has jump jets and the Cicada doesn't, so the Jenner wins in that category. At which point the question then becomes, why buy a Cicada? The Jenner has almost as much firepower, is more manoeuvrable, is more survivable. In the grand trilogy of things, the Jenner here, ladies and gentlemen, beats out the Cicada, so again I ask you the question, why buy a Cicada? I don't know. I'll see you next time.